Welcome to Coffee and Contemplation. I'm Robin.
I'm Heidi.
And today, we delve into Stranger Things 2 and introduce ourselves. Greetings and welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome. This is a Stranger Things rewatch podcast, and I wanted to take this brief pause before we begin to introduce ourselves a little bit more. We were so excited about season 1, we kind of just jumped in and we didn't really stop and kind of give some context for what we were going to be doing. I mean, we did a little bit. I kind of introed and said, like, you know, we love this show, but we didn't really give a lot of indication for who we are and what our perspective actually is. I think if you, dear listener, have been listening along all this time, then you probably picked up some things that we've alluded to. Context clues about like what our personalities are like. I'm a video editor.
I work in ed tech.
But we haven't really established it all that clearly. So we want to go ahead and do that, just, you know, and especially if you're new here, then this would be a good place to let you know just what you're in for, and especially as we move forward. So to start off with, I'm Robin, and I work as a video editor for a small media production company in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area, and I have a lot of experience both in like commercial video work, but also in filmmaking on independent film sets, and working as script supervisor I never actually got like paid to be a script doctor, but I have done a lot of that. I also self-published a YA fantasy novel in 2017. It's called Resistance Rising, a genre wars novel, and it's available on Amazon, ebook, and paperback. So I have a pretty broad creative background. How about you?
So I'm Heidi, once again. I work in creating curriculum. I have a lot of background in online academia and curriculum production. My bachelor's and master's are in English, so I have, you know, an overwhelming passion for literature. So one of the things that I think make our conversation so interesting and so fun is my primary focus, my basis for enjoying things is literature, and yours is film. But you also love literature, and I also love film. There's a lot of cross-pollination, especially in the, you know, mid to late 20th and 21st centuries. I mean, I know I love talking to you about film stuff because you help me appreciate things on a completely different level, you know, and me taking everything as text, I think it makes our conversations interesting because you're seeing a lot of layers where and this is not a criticism of myself, I'm kind of smushing everything together into like one thing, whereas you see many, many things. And they're both valid, and that's what makes it cool.
I'll say, I can see what they were going for here, and you can say, like, but this was the end result.
Right.
Very often that either comes to, and they really executed it, it worked, it translates, or it doesn't, and here's why. And kind of to that point, the sort of genesis of this podcast really was that we have a lot of these discussions, like, all the time anyway. Like,
might as well put the mic on.
Exactly.
And so another aspect of me coming from a literature background and me kind of looking at, you know, quote unquote, everything is text, is I'll be looking at things through a certain framework. And there's personal enjoyment framework, but also if I'm looking at something for critical analysis, I'm going to be saying, okay, like, what is the worldview? What are the morals? What's the ethos of this text? Coming from a very strong feminist background, that tends to be like a really core portion of my analysis. And I think it's really interesting to talk about pop culture with a feminist lens, partly because you see things that are uncomfortable, but also you get the opportunity to tease things out that are really, really cool and interesting and empowering that you might have just kind of taken for granted if you weren't looking from a specifically feminist lens.
Just so that we, and our listeners are on the same page. How do you define this feminist lens?
A great definition of feminism that I think is like really short, sweet, to the point is from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's TED Talk that is titled We Should All Be Feminists. It's also available as a little book. And pretty much everybody has heard this definition because it was in a Beyonce song, which is awesome. I love the song. I love everything about that. So the definition of a feminist is a person who believes in the social, economic, and political equality of the sexes. And I will just add a little addendum. That means all sexes, not just two.
So that's a little bit about like sort of our intellectual perspectives and kind of what we do for a living and kind of how that applies here. But just as kind of like a little fun aside, I thought it might be might be worthwhile to include a little bit about like our hobbies. So I think it's pretty clear we're both writers.
Yes.
Yeah. But also I'm actually a cosplayer, something that I didn't include in the finale of the first season of Stranger Things is that I have cosplayed as Steve Harrington before, and
it was awesome.
And then also as of this recording, I'm also very close to being done with a Max Mayfield. How about you? What are some of your hobbies?
So also writing. I am pretty much always working on something or daydreaming about something or bugging Robin about like, hey, do you think this would work? I also am a ballroom dancer. I have recently got into sewing. That was kind of like my quarantine. Instead of teaching myself how to make sourdough bread, I kind of got into sewing, and I want to start like making my own clothes and definitely like repairing my clothes as they need it and that kind of thing. And specifically, I'm really into like the vintage aesthetic and into like vintage silhouettes and clothes making. I don't know that I could ever really see myself, you know, hand sewing an entire early 19th century gown, but like I love watching other people do it on YouTube, and I love learning about historical costuming, and I really, really love the community of vintage style, not vintage values, because I think that like cultivating your own personal style and talking back to the mainstream as regards like fast fashion and all of that is like a really, really great way to be joyfully radical. And I admire that so much, and I think it's awesome.
What I think's interesting is that you and I are both very much into clothing in a way, but I would say even like borderline costume stuff, but from very different perspectives, which is not unlike how we approach this podcast.
I recently got into BTS. They did this sort of variety show thing during quarantine where they go out, like hang out in this like really beautiful house in the middle of the woods. And one of the things that they did was they put together this like massive Stranger Things Lego set. I actually really love Legos. Well, and I was like, is that a Stranger Things Lego? So I immediately looked it up because I was like, I'm buying it. It's massively expensive. However, it is possible that at some point in the future, we may end up with footage of me putting together Stranger Things Legos.
So all in all, we're both extremely creative people, but from a very like nerdy intellectual standpoint, that's really the vibe you're going to get from us. On that note, I wanted to briefly go over our history with Stranger Things. So Heidi, what is your history with Stranger Things?
You know, I don't remember how exactly I became aware of the series or stumbled across it, or, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, and then as soon as the season trailer dropped for Stranger Things 2, I was like, oh, this is going to be my jam. And then it was.
By all accounts, I should not like this show. I think I watched the trailer a couple times and just went, this is not for me. I'm not into horror. I've read maybe one Stephen King novel. I am technically a millennial, but I was born at the end of the 80s. So I really consider myself more of a 90s kid than I do an 80s kid, because that's really where more of my nostalgia comes from. But I remember I had a number of friends go, you have to watch this show. And I remember being surprised by the people telling me that, because I had a lot of people do that with me with Game of Thrones. Unpopular opinion, I'm not a fan of Game of Thrones.
That's not an unpopular opinion anymore.
Okay. But at the time, it really was. Yeah. And it wasn't my thing. And maybe it is really well made, but in service of what? And that's something we explore a little bit. So that was kind of my question with Stranger Things. When one of my friends, I believe it was my friend Jess, said these child actors are age appropriate and they are incredible. And then also she said the characterization work. You will appreciate how this thing is made. And I think maybe what she was picking up on at the time is that Stranger Things, while it is a lot of horror tropes structurally, and you can agree or disagree on this, it really is more fantasy than it is horror.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would probably be a controversial statement in some circles, but I actually agree with you because I am not a horror person, and I think some of the things that work our nerves a little bit are things that are more horror, that feel discordant to us because we don't like horror and because we do like the other elements of the show that are not based in horror, that are based in like adventure or coming of age or fantasy, like any of the numerous genres that Stranger Things dabbles in. Yeah.
And so I was like, all right, I'm going to give this 3 episodes. By the time it got to the title sequence, I was like, I'm in. I'm completely in. And I did not expect that. I was very surprised. And so here we are, all these years later, doing a podcast about it. So that's a little bit about us and about our perspective, our background, and about how we ended up here. I want to just kind of go back and revisit some wrap-up thoughts, takeaways from season 1. We touched on this a little bit at the end of the Upside Down, chapter 8, the Upside Down, but we didn't really invest a whole lot of time in that because I think, by that point we were at the end and we didn't want to belabor the point. But before we proceed, let's kind of get a sense of where we're at coming into season 2. So revisit some of our thoughts from the end of season 1, but also talk a little bit more in detail about that Comic-Con trailer. It was the first thing we saw of anything for season 2, and I mentioned that at the end of the Upside Down because it was such a big deal for me as a viewer, as a fan, and it still continues to be. So, and I actually think it's a lot more relevant to the discussion we will proceed to have. But let's just start with season 1 wrap up. So I was surprised, as far as the podcast is concerned, at the direction a lot of our conversation took. I didn't think we would talk nearly as much about the high schoolers as we did. I thought the bulk of our conversation, the majority of our conversation, would be about the kids.
There's more to debate when it comes to the teenagers. The kids, they have that argument, and we did cover that pretty extensively. But the high schoolers are the ones that, they're really messy. And I don't even mean that as a criticism of either the characters or the writing of the characters, except for the decisions that we talked about that we don't like. But they're most teenager-like. So there is going to be a lot to talk about and to analyze and dive into there, whereas the kids are kids, and Joyce and Hopper are already fully fledged adults, so they have their sense of identity is always already pretty well established. Coming from getting my degrees in the humanities and academia, there definitely is a danger when you're doing a lot of really, really close reading, a lot of really close analysis, to lose sight of the forest for the trees. And that's one of the reasons that I did not end up pursuing a career in academia, because I think academia can get a little bit too much, you're trying to do a living dissection. It doesn't serve any purpose. But I think that I was surprised, not necessarily by how much we were able to say positive and by how much we were able to tease out that didn't work or that we didn't like, because I really, really like the show. I know you really, really like the show, and absolutely no show ever made is perfect. There's always room for constructive criticism. So yeah, I was really happy with our balance.
Picking up on that too, I think there is a tendency in the fandom and just I think in general to overpraise season 1 as this work of genius, with very little wrong with it. And I don't think that that's fair.
Yeah.
I think there is much of season 1 that could have been better. What is great about this show is that I do think you can see visible effort in all 3 seasons. They do take chances. And season 1 in and of itself was one massive risk. And I don't think you could really repeat season 1 of Stranger Things. I don't think anything could have come as close to what that was.
Season 1 was so unexpected and so innovative, and so I think it would be very difficult to kind of live up to that level of innovation.
And it was also released filmmaking, audience watching climate that was very different from when season 2 dropped. It was among Netflix's first original shows. I think they had produced a few other things before that, but it was certainly the biggest step forward in that game.
Right.
Amazon did not have original content, as I recall, by that point, and if it did, it certainly wasn't common knowledge yet. It also was kind of the first of its kind in that way.
Yeah, that's quite true.
And I think that that's kind of why I like the second season so much, is that you can see where they did repeat certain things plot-wise, structure-wise, but I also think that they didn't just carbon copy it.
I haven't seen that criticism, so to be fair, I think one thing that's actually kind of cool going into the second season is that I did not see any kind of hate, just for want of a better term, regarding season 2. I just didn't see it. And you kind of did. So but both of us really love season 2, although apparently that might be a somewhat controversial opinion. I don't know. I'm operating it as if it's not. But yeah, that was something that was it hadn't even occurred to me. This is genre fiction. All genre fiction ends the same. Every romance novel ends the same. Every alien invasion movie ends the same. Like,
Or at
this is
least-
what you're here for.
Yeah, or at least has a lot of the same conventions.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I do remember there being a lot of positive feedback as well. But I remember being surprised by just how much negative feedback there was, and then how much that got echoed when season 3 basically came out, because it was people were comparing the two, and how can you not do that? But it reminded me a lot of what a lot of the negative feedback was when Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix came out. You know, there'd been all this anticipation. It was one of the first times in a long time that there had been this massive wait, and it certainly was the first time in a long time, like even longer probably, that it had that much pop culture attention focused on it. Everyone was reading it. At the time, I was moving. I remember I got the book and I read a few chapters, but then I couldn't, for want of a better term, binge read it. I had to take it very slowly and only read it, you know, piecemeal pretty much. I think that had a significant impact on my experience of the book at the time, because I remember so many other people that I talked to, friends, were talking about how it was not what they'd waited 2 years for. It was just, it didn't live up to their expectations. And I think because those expectations had gestated over the course of a long period of time, there was no way it could meet that. And I would say general discourse about the series has changed over time. I think people have been able to see past a lot of those expectations and can see the value in a lot of Harry's PTSD, for example. And I actually think that there's a lot in common between Order of the Phoenix and season 2 of Stranger Things. Common elements of PTSD. Season 2 does not go, Will is perfectly fine.
Right. I think it just bears repeating. I think we've said it multiple times, but I think it bears repeating every time that I'm still a fan of Harry Potter, but I am not a fan of J.K. Rowling. Again, I did not experience that kind of, you know, backlash that you saw, but I think that the other parallel that can be made here, in Order of the Phoenix, you have this terrible, terrible thing that happened. There's this core group of people that know that it happened and they know it was real, but the wider community is just either in denial or actively hostile to this information becoming public. And I think that that very same thing happens in Stranger Things too. You have this core group of people who know exactly what went down. And then you have like the larger power structure is just not interested in addressing it or even interested in like actively suppressing this information. And I'm projecting, I'm guessing, etc. Maybe one reason that folks were a little bit, especially younger people, were a little bit uncomfortable with Order of the Phoenix is because they thought you would go directly from the kind of confrontation at the end of Goblet of Fire almost really to Deathly Hallows, where there's this like open warfare, and society just does not work that way.
100%.
And possibly one of the reasons that the second season is also one of my favorites is that I really, really like the depiction of that struggle of someone who is battling with their PTSD, trying to make a positive change, not knowing how to do it, coming up against all of these roadblocks. I find that very valuable and very meaningful.
Yeah, and that doesn't just go for Will. Multiple characters in season 2 are dealing with that. So my goal with reviewing season 2 is going to be largely to give it some love and to really dig into why I think it's better than some folks give it credit for. Including, but not limited to, defending the inclusion of Bob, Max, Billy, and why, in my opinion, they are successful additions to the character roster, and even get a bit controversial over my opinion of the Lost Sister episode. I actually don't hate it, but we'll get there when we get there.
I think our opinions on season 2 are probably going to be pretty similar.
So on the whole, I do still want to continue with honest critique. I don't want to ignore problematic aspects of the show. I want to pay attention to that, as we have done, but I also really want to throw some love its way.
Yeah, same.
So, that Comic-Con trailer. This was the first trailer that dropped all the way back in July of 2017. It was just perfectly deployed piece of marketing. I've always enjoyed Thriller, but hearing it in that context, along with the way the song was mixed and edited for the promo, it actually made it sound ominous and scary rather than just like the fun Halloween dance anthem that I feel like it's most known for being, at least in my experience of it.
Yeah, not mine. When I was probably under 10, but not by too much, and it must have been some like sort of anniversary or something of Thriller coming out, and my mom was all excited to watch it with me because reasons. Like, Thriller was a groundbreaking video and it's amazing and, all the things. We also don't like MJ anymore, but, So she was really excited to share it with me, and I got so scared multiple times. I am not a horror movie person, but we had to, like, stop and start, like, a bunch of different times because there's, like, zombies and stuff, and, like, Michael Jackson turns into a zombie, and, like, I thought he was cool. I thought he was, like, the date. What are we doing? So we had to stop, and Mom had to, like, explain to me that, like, this is just for fun. It's going to be okay. And then I remember being so irritated because right at the very end, when MJ turns around and he's got the weird eyes, because it's like, we have everything's okay. We're going home. It's all over now. And then he turns, and I was like, Mom.
Yeah. I love to roller skate, so I've been to a roller rink many times.
Oh, that'd be great.
It is a fantastic song to skate to. They turn the lights down and they turn up the disco lights. Like, it really is. And I remember the first time that happened, I went, oh, I can see why this was such a big hit, like in clubs and, for dancers, because it is such a mood. Like, it really, really is. So I think I've thought of it musically, but with this trailer, it was just the way it's utilized. It really, the second season is set during Halloween, so it's perfect. It's, it's very timely. And so as a result of that, like, the trailer really did evoke a pretty convincing sense of dread. It drew me in, still does. It evokes concern for the characters without scaring you off at the same time, because I do think that's a pretty good balance. And I mean, for me, while I was invested more than I realized at that point, I don't know that if it had seemed too scary, I might not have given it a try right away. But because it hit just the right pitch, it was like, oh no, I have to watch this.
It does evoke a sense of scary things are happening. But what it evokes a lot more is a sense of spiraling out of control. It re-establishes, like, how much you care about these people. Like, I'm thinking about Nancy, I'm thinking about Joyce, I'm thinking about Will. Even the way that it opens, like, before we get into, Thriller, with the kids playing that video game. It's like, hey, remember these people? Remember how much you care about them? Well, they are about to, like, shit is getting real. So the kind of impulse that you have as you were watching that trailer is that you want to reach through the screen and, like, help. So it's not focused so much on, look at this monster, it's super scary. There is a little bit of that. It's more like we're seeing Will and something's wrong with Will, and scary things are happening to the people that we care about, and they're not able to control it.
And it teases just the right amount of new material. It provides only glimpses of Bob, Max, Billy, and not to mention the Mind Flayer. Plus, it doesn't include Kali at all.
Yeah.
Which on one hand seems not great, but I do think it was the right move ultimately, because by not showing Kali, it allows the absolutely brilliant opening sequence of Mad Max to take a lot of viewers by pleasant surprise. And I know that there was a second trailer, but
I mean, everybody I know was so hype about the Comic-Con trailer that, like, we just watched that
on loop.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. And more than anything, though, I think, and this is why I think it ultimately is really important and warrants our talking about it, is that I actually think it summarizes the second season really well. It doesn't just tease it, it actually serves as a summary. It indicates right from the jump and remains throughout that this season will dwell on the trauma of season 1 from an emotional standpoint. As I mentioned, Will isn't just back to normal. Yeah, he's going to get possessed, but he's also struggling emotionally with the horror that he went through and how it's still affecting his day-to-day life, as demonstrated in the show by his relationships, the note in his locker, the way he's bullied on Halloween, entirely separate from the Mind Flayer's interference. And the trailer forecasts that along with Mike's grief and the strain on Nancy and Stia's relationship. And I do think it's easy to sort of miss that, given how much else the trailer sketches out the plot and that all is not actually well and the adventure is not remotely over, like, which was what you were saying. But I do think that if you look at the trailer from that perspective, it actually is telling you exactly, because a lot of the negative critique that came out that I'm referring to centered around this idea of, like, episodes 1 and 2 of season 1 they hit the ground running so fast.
Yeah.
And season 2 is a bit of a slow start, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I actually think that works really well in its favor, which we will discuss as we go. But also there was a lot of, like, but it's dealing with all this, like, stuff from, like, it's just, I don't know. And there's a surprise there. Like, why is this the way that it is? And it's like, to me, the trailer tells you that.
Right. you having a background in film and me having a background in literature is actually a really good thing, because it's kind of wild to me that people think that the first few episodes are slow. I thought those episodes were like incredibly engaging because of the deep psychology that they go into. The conversations that I remember were talking about like how great it was and how refreshing it was that they didn't treat season 2 as a sort of clean slate, and that they did go into that kind of deep character work. Like, I am all about characterization and, you know, the internal life of the character and all of that. So like, you will never lose me with that.
So all of that said, some of my predictions at the time from that trailer were that A, Nancy would be pregnant, B, Billy and Max were both going to be villains, and C, that Elle would somehow get transformed through coming back out of the Upside Down, that she might somehow end up being the Demogorgon, because of course we didn't know that there'd be a Mind Flayer yet, but I was and still am so happy to have been so wrong. Looking back, I'm not sure why I thought that about Elle. You know, many of the characters went in and out of the Upside Down by a variety of methods and in season 1, and not once did anyone get changed. You know, I remember not being surprised by the reveal that she was still alive in the trailer. I think I was even kind of glad, like, cool. They're not, kind of like how they did with another trailer that dropped for season 4. They were just like, yep, here it is. Speculate no more. I mean, speculate about other stuff, but not about this particular question of this character being alive. You know, at the time I'd heard reports that, Millie Bobby Brown had been recast and was returning as Elle by relatively reputable sources. I couldn't tell you which ones they were. I want to say like probably Nerdist and IGN and stuff like that. But I just remember being like, oh, cool, she's back. Awesome.
I remember us talking about the Nancy being pregnant theory. And
oh, really?
Yeah. I don't remember exactly what your reasoning was, but I remember being like, yeah, maybe. I hope not. That's so messy, and they have so much other stuff that they're trying to deal with. It would really, really go a lot farther with the whole, like, you're punished for having sex, you're punished for not having sex thing. I was just like, can we not? Can we just not? And then they didn't, and it was great.
It was the two of the shots that we got of Nancy in that trailer were, the first one was her and Steve in the alley, or it's not an alley. They're outside the school, and it's the shot, just the glimpse of it when he's walking away from her. He even like rips the towel off of his shoulder, like in what looks like frustration. So my brain went, oh, she just told him that she's pregnant. But I'd forgotten that we talked about it. So yeah. The trailer, basically, it works for me on every level, and I wanted to highlight it before we move ahead because, it serves almost as a thesis statement. And I don't think that trailers always do that, nor do I think they have to. But I do think that this one really, really does, and it does it beautifully.
I remember watching the trailer for the first time, and it was just like, my eyes were just like glued to the screen. I was like, what is happening? I was like so hyped for it. And I actually had to watch season 2 of Stranger Things really slowly because I was moving. So I had to do things like, okay, like if you unpack XYZ number of boxes, then you can watch an episode of Stranger Things.
Nice.
And I was trying really, really hard to not binge it, but also to like watch it before all of my friends were already done with it and have to be like, no, we can't talk about it because I haven't watched it, Like watching the trailer again today, like, yeah, this is a damn good trailer. And I kind of appreciate the way that you have teased out what makes it a good trailer.
Trailers are basically, it's short form storytelling, right? You have to condense this entire piece of media down into 3 minutes. And so I even said when we watched this trailer, that's like a masterclass in editing. So with all of that said, that's going to conclude our sort of pre-game discussion of season 2, and we will see you next time with our proper discussion of chapter 2, Mad Max.
Thank you for listening.
Over and out.
Bonus episode or something where I just sit there and I know you don't like Legos, but you can sit and chill with me.
I will film it. How about that?
You can film it, and then you can sit next to me and talk to me and keep me company and say like, it's okay, Heidi. It's okay. You have the directions for a reason.